All right, guys, in this video, I'm going to touch on the actual specifics of the inner ear, okay? So I'm going to bring it down to this image right here first. This is an image taken of the ear model that I went over in a previous video, all right? So what I'm showing here is first you have this middle ear, which houses the three auditory ossicles. I have them labeled. You first have the malleus, then the incus, and then the stapes, all right? Now, the model doesn't show it, but the incus and the stapes, they are connected, all right? All right, so then the stapes, it looks like it kind of goes into what would be the inner ear, but it doesn't, all right? And we'll go over why it doesn't in a second, okay? But what you see in outlined in blue is everything that we consider the inner ear, all right? So we're mostly talking about this whole structure right here. It contains three different parts that I touched on before. So this coiled part is the cochlea. Then you have the middle part, which kind of connects these two lateral structures. This is called the vestibule. And then you have the semicircular canals. Now you either have a anterior, which is here, you have a posterior, which is there, or you have a lateral. And they just go on how they are oriented, which direction they're facing. Okay? All right, so this whole structure that we call the inner ear, however, is a little bit more complicated, all right? So we consider these three structures to actually be the bony labyrinth, all right? So this bony labyrinth is kind of just like a very large box, all right? So you have one box. And then you have what's also called the membranous labyrinth, all right? And this is a box inside of the bony labyrinth. Now, instead of just having free space, these labyrinths, in between these labyrinths, there's a specific type of fluid, all right? So in between the bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth of these structures is what we call perilymph, all right? Perilymph. So it's all this, there's fluid all throughout it, all right, in between the two boxes or in between the two labyrinths. So bony labyrinth has perilymph, so I like to think of it as PB, all right? So PB, like peanut butter. All right. Then inside the membranous labyrinth, you have another fluid, which is called endolymph, okay? So you have boxes and then you have fluids. Now, the membranous labyrinth, it has endolymph, so I like to think of it as ME or me. Okay, so you have peanut butter and me. All right, that's just a way to help you remember it if you need it. All right. So now these fluids, the endolymph and the perilymph, they have a very important job. So if you may remember, the vestibule and the semicircular canals assist with detecting head movement and position, where the cochlea actually helps with hearing sound waves. All right. And that is because of these fluids. So endolymph, has a really high concentration of potassium ions and sodium ions. Perilymph, it has, again, high concentrations of sodium and potassium, but they're a little bit different from each other. The perilymph kind of resembles extracellular fluid, and endolymph is more like cytosol. So these two fluids, though, what they're doing is helping transducing sound waves and then also head movements into action potentials. Okay, so that is how these structures are able to perform as they do, is because of these fluids. All right, so let's get into some actual structures within the inner ear. All right, so you have the vestibule, you have the semicircular canals, and you have the cochlea. But what's inside these besides the bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth and those two liquids? Okay, so in the vestibule, you have what's called the oval window, all right? So the oval window is why it looks like the stapes is kind of in the inner ear, okay? The oval window is in the vestibule, but the stapes covers it completely, okay? And then it kind of makes a horseshoe, and then it goes and connects to the incus, and then the incus connects to the malleus. Okay, so the stapes is covering that window. So it's almost not even a window, all right? It's completely covered by this whole structure right here of the stapes, all right? All right, so in the semicircular canals, we know that we have the posterior, the anterior, and the lateral canals, but we also have ducts. So the ducts are actually what we call the membranous labyrinth within the semicircular canals, okay? So here you have membranous labyrinth is in orange, right? And then you have, where the canals are, you have, it's actually just being labeled as ducts, all right? So you have the posterior semicircular duct where the posterior semicircular canal is, and then they're calling it horizontal here, but it's really lateral, so vice versa. So when you get into the actual semicircular canal, instead of calling it bony labyrinth versus membranous labyrinth, you call it canal versus duct. All right? And it's a little similar in the cochlea as well. The cochlea has the cochlear duct inside it. All right. So again, the cochlea would be considered the bony labyrinth because it's in blue, but then inside is the cochlear duct, which is then filled with endolymphs. So it's very similar to, or it is the membranous labyrinth of the cochlea. Okay. Now, the cochlea also has what's called the round window. So, round window right here. So, the round window, if we were to, down on this image of the actual model, if we were to lift that piece up like we did in the other video, there would be an actual round window on the bottom, okay? But this is what it looks like. It's kind of under where the oval window would be if the stapes wasn't covering it. And then there's the round window. So this is actually what separates the inner and middle ear is the round window, not the oval window or the stapes. So that is how these structures are connected and how we classify them versus looking at what they're filled with and what their actual function is. All right.